As a business owner or manager, our scarcest and most precious resource is our limited attention. So what we pay attention to can make all the difference. If you think about your organization or your business, what are the high leverage opportunities that you should be paying attention to? In fact, how do you find what these high leverage opportunities are? I'm often asked by clients, how do you go about doing that? And I think the simplest way to explain it is to look at our income statement or profit and loss statement, because that's organized in a way of a sequence of leverage. So let's put some numbers together and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So think about an organization that has a sales revenue of 100. If you have a small business, that could represent $100,000 per year. If you have a large business, this could represent $100 million a year. We will then look at what the variable cost is, and say in this case the variable cost, all the raw materials and external costs are around 50% of that, so around 50. That then gives us a gross margin of 50. And then we, of course, have to subtract the operating expenses. And there's two types of operating expenses. There's operating expenses that are direct, and there are operating expenses that are indirect. So let's just say that the indirect operating expenses versus the direct operating expenses is a ratio of 30 to 15. So 15 is essentially the wages that I have to pay in order to generate the sales of 100, and the 50 is all the others. So that gives me a combined operating expenses of 45. And I can then calculate my net profit, which in this case would be 50 minus the 45 is 5 units. So what I'd like to do is to just take these numbers and show you what would be the leverage that you could get by achieving just a 1% improvement in the various areas that are typically under control of business owners or managers. We'll start from the top and then we'll go to the bottom. So the first one that I'm going to be looking at is price. So what if we could achieve just a 1% increase in the selling price for our product or service? What will be the impact on our net profit? Now, even though these numbers are quite simple, I would encourage you to actually do the calculations and follow me as I do the calculations so you can see how it is possible to quickly quantify the impact of a 1% change of any of these variables on the outcome. So if you think about increasing the average selling price by 1%, 1% of 100 is 1, so our sales revenue will go up to 101. Our variable cost doesn't go up if we increase the selling price of the end product, so that will stay at 50, and as a result our gross margin will go to 51. The operating expenses we haven't changed, so that will remain at the 45, made up still of the 15 and 30, and that 1 comes down to increase our profits from 5 to 6. Now, if you look at that, we've gone from 5 to 6, that's a 20% improvement in profits with every 1% increase in the average selling price that we can get. That's a 1 to 20 leverage, which is enormous. Those are the type of opportunities that you should be paying attention to. Now you might ask, well, how do we increase the average selling price? The most obvious one is just reduce the discounts that you give away. There are other ways in terms of selling direct to the consumer rather than through a distributor or a wholesaler. And then of course charging additional for emergency shipments, etc. So there are many ways to increase the average selling price. But this example is to purely show to you the high leverage you can get if that is possible. Let's look at the second leverage point, is in terms of the quantity that we sell. So again, if I want to check what would be the impact of just a 1% increase in the quantity that I sell, my sales revenue will again go up by 1. My variable cost in this case will go up because I'm selling more, which means I will consume more raw materials or other inputs that I use, and 1% of 50 would be 0.5. So as a result, my gross margin would go up from 50 to 50.5. And again, my operating expenses in this case will not change. And as a result, what will happen to my net profit? This whole additional 0.5 will drop to my bottom line, so I'll have a profit of 5.5. Now, 5.5 compared to 5, that's a 10% increase in net profit. For every 1% that I can sell more, that gives me a 1 to 10 leverage. Again, enormous leverage, a high leverage point that business owners and senior managers should be focused on. Of course, there are additional ways that I can increase net profits, which relates to reduction in costs. But whereas increases in price and quantity tends to be wins for you and your suppliers, the reduction in costs is always a lose either for your suppliers and employees, and it doesn't necessarily give you that much leverage. So if you think about a reduction in operating expenses, for example, so we look at direct operating expenses, which is reducing the part of the operating expenses that is under our control, which is the direct operating expenses. In this case, a 1% reduction in direct operating expenses is not going to change our sales revenue. That will be still at 100. Our variable cost will not change, and as a result, our gross margin will not change. The only thing that will change was our operating expenses direct will reduce by 1%. And 1% of 15 would be 0.15, so this would reduce to 14.8. This will stay at 50, and therefore that goes to 44.85, and my profitability will go up by that 0.15. Now, 0.15 compared to 5 is just a 3% change, and that gives me a 1 to 3 leverage. Now, when you think about where most business owners and managers are focusing their limited attention when their profitability is under pressure, they almost immediately jump to trying to reduce costs, which normally means laying off people. Not only it has a very small leverage, you're only getting 1 to 3 impact, but it has high risk associated with it. It can result in you losing your best people or people striking. Whereas the biggest leverage is sitting and applying your attention to saying, what can I do to increase the average selling price of my product or service? And then what can I do to increase the average quantity that I'm selling over a period? Those are giving me by far the biggest leverage. For example, if I can come up with a way of just increasing my average selling price by 5%, just by reducing my average discount by 5%, my leverage is 1 to 20. So a 5% increase in price will give me 100% increase in profitability. Those are enormous leverage and the type of things that business owners and managers should be focusing their attention on rather than looking at how they can reduce the operating expenses by laying off people.